There is an intelligence of play, a rich and free exploration of relationship, nothing to justify or defend. The feel of a glove, a blade of grass, the sound of a great swing and a child's smile. There is an intelligence of play, a free and expansive exploration in relationship, trust, and affection. It's a model of learning and performance we feel will light the way now and into the next century. We invite you to become a part of this vision, to discover and develop this quality in yourself, the intelligence of play, a new model for a new generation of children. James W. Prescott, PhD, is a developmental neuropsychologist and cross-cultural psychologist. Jim has devoted his professional life to the study of peaceful and violent behaviors, focusing specifically on the impact of early mother-infant nurturing and its lifelong impact on the developing brain. He was formerly health science administrator at the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development in Washington, D.C.
The intelligence of play is what we're going to be talking about, but what I want to talk about is some of the foundations which is going to make possible or not possible the intelligence of play. Underlying all this is really the transformation of human society from one of violence, and depression, alienation, to one of peace and harmony and happiness. And that's basically what I think this is all about. And I have approached those problems as a developmental neuropsychologist and cross-cultural psychologist in examining the beginnings of all this and ask a question: how does a society take an innocent newborn and place that newborn on a life path that's characterized by peace and happiness and love and harmony, or the opposite? You know, depression, alienation, anger, rage, violence. And I think that is the most fundamental question of all. And I can certainly say without any hesitation that we're not going to find the answer in our genes, so we'll say no more about that. What we have learned over the years, and I've devoted most of my professional life to this, is examining the roots of this in the mother-infant relationship. That the mother-infant relationship is the beginning relationship of all other human relationships, and the relationship to society and to the planet itself. And there's been an enormous amount of research that's been conducted over the past quarter of a century that shows and is documented that the failure of mother love, of affectional bonding in the mother-infant relationship, does induce developmental brain abnormalities, both structurally and functionally. And it's these brain abnormalities that underlie the depression, the alienation, the anger, the rage, the violence. So we do have a large body of knowledge, not only from what I've been involved in, but all of you here, that we can bring to bear on this transformation of human society is what we're really all about. So let me comment about the good fortune that we recently had by the White House recognizing finally the significance of the role of the environment in influencing the child's brain development and behavior in the recent White House conference on brain-child development behavior that was held this past April 17th. Their focus, as we know, has been on cognitive skills and development, language, math, music, but you heard very little about the other side of development, which is our emotional, social, and sexual development. No reference to the major breakthroughs that were made over a quarter of a century ago of how the failure of mother love leads to developmental brain abnormalities, specifically of the emotional, social, and sexual brain. And there lies most of where our modern problems exist. And I think we can all recognize that a child who has been abused, neglected, who's depressed, who's alienated, who's filled with anger and rage, and is violent, is not going to be able to participate in the intelligence of play. The damage has already been done. So what I want to try to focus on and highlight very briefly in these few moments that I have is that kind of damage that is done, the sensory systems that we know are involved, and what we can do for prevention. Now, it's very clear that the sensory environment, the sensory stimuli, is like a nutrient for normal brain development. And if the developing brain doesn't receive adequate sensory stimulation from all of our senses, there's not normal brain growth and development structurally and functionally. Now, when it comes to a mother-infant relationship, there are certain sensory systems that are more important than others. And we discovered that the two most important are body touch and body movement, and particularly body movement. And this is what's going to have a crucial, a central role for understanding the power of intelligence of play because of that particular sensory system, but others. So when I joined the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development back in the 60s, no one had raised the question of trying to understand these behavioral pathologies in terms of abnormal brain processes. It was all social, psychological evaluations, assessment. But it's very, very clear that sensory stimulation is absolutely essential for normal brain growth and development, and particularly as it involves the intimate physical affectional relationship that Mother Nature has provided in the mother-infant relationship. And again, this involves the primary senses of touch and movement, but also smell. And that involves another dimension of behavior of intimacy, the movement stimulation, I feel, which involves the vestibular cerebellar system, and we'll talk more about that later today, conveys, in my sense, the psychological characteristic of basic trust. And this is conveyed by the mother carrying the infant on the body of the mother throughout the day. That's incidentally the primary sensory input during fetal development is movement. And then touch for affectional relating and bonding. They're all, of course, interrelated, but these are, I think, some basic psychological characteristics that flow from these sensory systems. Unless we pay attention to those very first earlier stages of development, the newborn infant-mother relationship, and to assure the normal development of the brain, we're going to have enormous difficulty in instituting programs of this kind because, again, the damage has already been done. Now, in addition to the sensory processes that are associated with nurturance and bonding and the basic trust and love and all that goes with it, there's also the very extraordinary importance of breastfeeding and breast milk. And I just want to mention this very briefly to indicate how important that mother-infant relationship is. That what we have discovered in a variety of studies is that there's a certain brain neurotransmitter called serotonin, brain serotonin, which we know when deficits of brain serotonin exists is associated with depression, impulse discontrol, and pathological violence. And I initiated some of those earlier studies with the animals, the mother-deprived animals, but that relationship is very well established with adult human violent individuals, both homicidal and suicidal. So there's no question about that relationship. Now, the implication back to breastfeeding. Human breast milk contains an enormous amount of nutrients and biochemical factors not present in formula milk. One of the critical elements is tryptophan, which is an amino acid, a precursor amino acid essential for the development of brain serotonin. So when the newborn infant is not breastfed, the brain is deprived of that critical nutrient that makes the normal development of the brain serotonin system possible. So we have now two independent, quote, independent sources that influence the developing brain that we know results in alterations and abnormalities that are linked to later depression, impulse, discontrol, and violence. So one of the priorities that our society, any human society, must have if we're going to begin this reconstruction is to support women as nurtured mothers. And we have not been doing that, particularly with respect to breastfeeding. And the World Health Organization has recommended 2 years and beyond for breastfeeding. Now, this is very foreign to our culture. And I get a lot of negative reactions from women. What, breastfeed for 2 years and beyond? But when you examine what really happens And and there are a number of women actually who breastfeed not only 2 years, but 3, 4, 5 years. La Leche League International has a number of these families. What you find is a bonding and an intimacy that develops, which involves all the sensory systems, touch and movement and smell. And when you encode that developing brain over a 2-year period or longer, I will guarantee you, you will have a child who will develop to be happy and can relate intimately with women and not in an exploitive or violent manner. Now, I do want to point out that when I talk about the failure of mother love, by no means am I laying the blame on mother. It's really society that has failed to recognize the importance of woman as nurturing mother. And we see that in our national policies of daycare. We're now pushing welfare mothers with infants into institutional daycare, where they cannot bond with their mother, and they're certainly not going to bond with the daycare operators. And if you don't have that first basic bonded relationship, these children are growing up not able to bond with anyone. And so we have the foundation for the sociopaths, the psychopaths, and this increasing phenomenon that we're seeing of children killing children, you know, without remorse, without compassion, without empathy. So that's, you know, in a broad overview, my perspective and how we must address these first issues if we're going to successfully address the issues involved in intelligence of play. But in fact, as we know here, the intelligence of play is a powerful instrument for correcting that deficiency and assuring the proper sensory stimulation and affectional bonding, because that is an integral part of the intelligence of play. Now, let me briefly summarize some of the cross-cultural studies I've done that reinforce what we've learned from the experimental animal studies. And what you're going to see on the videotape is probably the most important study in the primate literature on mother-infant separation. It was conducted by Dr. Bill Mason and Gersh Berkson, in which they reared infant monkeys separated from the mother at birth in a cage by themselves, but in a colony room where they could see, hear, and smell other monkeys and have social communication based upon no sensory modalities. But they had no body contact, no touch, no movement, except what Dr. Mason and Berkson did is that in one of the experimental conditions, which was the experimental condition, they had this artificial surrogate mother move. The other one was bolted to the floor, which did not move. That one difference of body movement made all the difference in the world. It prevented all the social-emotional, virtually all the social-emotional pathologies that resulted from mother-infant separation. So we have now know what really is most critically important in the mother-infant relationship. And so based upon that discovery, I wanted to confirm this on human populations. And so at that time, Professor John Whiting, who was a professor of anthropology at Harvard, had done a number of studies of primitive cultures on child rearing practices. And I asked him, I says, is there a database that I can examine with respect to cultures that carry their infant on the body of the mother all day long versus those that don't? Because that turned out that was the really critical variable. And he says, yes, there is. And so I went to that database and found 49 primitive cultures in a 400 culture sample, which had information on whether the culture carried the infant on the body of the mother all day or did not, and also the violence of the culture. And to make a long story short, that one variable was sufficiently powerful to predict the peaceful or violent nature of 80% of these primitive cultures distributed throughout the world. Incidentally, the other 20%, the peaceful and violent nature, was predicted from whether adolescent sexuality was permitted or punished. But it all gets back to pleasure. Because when we're talking about being carried, I mean, take a look at children. What do they want to do? You know, up go the arms. You know, they want to be picked up and held and carried. You know, I remember raising my 2 daughters. When I came home, the first thing the toddlers do, up go the arms, and you pick them up and you carry them around. And so, and I just want to reinforce that the importance of that sensory process, because it is the dominant sensory stimulation in utero and fetal development. And so it's absolutely important to continue that bond, because that movement stimulation, that being attached to the body, is sort of the external umbilical cord, which conveys to that infant, that child, that is still connected with mother. Okay? And it's just a very traumatic experience for that newborn infant to be, quote, disconnected from the body of its mother, and then it becomes disconnected with the body of everything else. I think that's probably a good introduction to the film material, which I'd now like to show you, so that you can see really the power of the sensory environment and shaping the future behavior of not only human primates, but essentially all mammals, because this is a mammalian universal. And I just simply want to point out that there's no mammal on this planet that separates the newborn from its mother at birth, except the human mammal. There's no mammal on this planet that denies the breast of the mother to the newborn, except the human primate.
Some of these children at Löhe House Institution in Munich have suffered brain damage. Some are mentally retarded. All have suffered the effects of disrupted maternal-infant relationship. The effects of early separation from their mothers upon children were noted in scientific publications some 25 years ago, when psychiatrist René Spitz observed a high frequency of retarded development among institutionalized children. The English psychiatrist John Bowlby created controversy in 1944 with his conclusion that early separation leads to a character disorder marked by a lack of affection or feelings for anyone. These depressed children might be found in institutions around the world. They are withdrawn. Their pace of development has slowed. They are listless, vacant, unnaturally passive. They have few emotional contacts or relations with others, little spontaneity, no laughter, no tears. At the Hazleton Laboratories in Falls Church, Virginia, these normal monkeys are being studied and filmed by Dr. James Prescott of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. Active, curious, and alert, these healthy monkeys have been raised by their mothers. When they are put together in a cage, they react to each other with interest. They are at ease with each other. They play and touch each other freely. When Dr. Prescott separates the monkeys, they resist, holding each other tightly. They maintain body contact and cling to each other even through the wire mesh of their cages. Monkeys raised in isolation behave quite differently. These monkeys were removed from their mothers at birth. They were hand-fed in incubators. They were raised in cages through which they could see, hear, and smell other monkeys, but could not touch or be touched by them. When they are put together, there is no play between them. They seem indifferent to touch. Or they react as though touch is unpleasant and move away from each other. When they are held, the isolation-reared monkeys show signs of great stress, screeching and baring their teeth. Dr. A.J. Berman observes the extreme aggressiveness and hypersensitivity to touch of these Harlow monkeys raised in isolation. After the cage barrier is removed, the monkeys stalk each other. The moment they touch, they are driven to a violent attack. Isolation-reared monkeys are frequently observed biting and chewing away at their own limbs, a phenomenon frequently observed in mentally ill humans as well.
Probably the most significant of the primate isolation-rearing studies, next to the Harlow's original contributions, was that conducted by Dr. William Mason and Gersh Bergson, Dr. Mason was also in Harlow's laboratory, in which he reared isolation-reared infant monkeys on a swinging mother surrogate, and another group were reared on a stationary mother surrogate. And lo and behold, what happens is that this infant monkey that was sitting on this swinging mother surrogate did not develop any of the emotional, social psychopathologies. There was not the depression, the withdrawal behavior, the autistic-like behaviors, the rocking behaviors, self-stimulation behaviors, nor the pathological violence when they grew up as juveniles and adults. They had no tactile aversion, which the infant monkeys who were reared on the stationary surrogate had developed.
This swinging substitute mother, a bleach bottle covered with furry cloth, was invented for an experiment by Doctors William Mason and Gershon Bergson at the Delta Primate Center in Louisiana. The isolated monkey has known no other mother than this moving surrogate, which rises, falls, and sways in a random way. This isolated monkey has an identical substitute mother, but the mother does not move. At 10 months of age, the monkey raised on a moving mother substitute is given a chance to make close physical contact with a human being. His behavior seems normal. He appears to be curious, bold, and friendly. The monkey raised with a stationary mother behaves in quite a different way. He seems timid, cringing, and apparently unhappy. He appears emotionally disturbed, unsociable, and unresponsive to changes in the environment. Rocking and other abnormal behavior were prevented in the monkey on the swinging surrogate. The monkey on the stationary surrogate displays the familiar stereotyped rocking movements.
So what this study indicated was that another sensory system was of crucial importance, in fact, more important than just touch. And that's the sensory system that mediates motion, movement. And that's the vestibular cerebellar system. And when you look back on it, and you look at what happens in utero, the dominant sensory system is one of motion, of movement.
The stereotyped movements of rocking backwards and forwards over and over again are typical of animals deprived of normal mothering. It is as though the animals attempt to give themselves the touch and motion stimuli they were denied in infancy. Similar behaviors in maternally deprived children, rocking and other stereotype movements, are common symptoms observed in institutionalized children all over the world. Some children who engage in stereotyped movement, endlessly repeated, show evidence of brain damage. Stereotypical movements are observed in retarded children as well. All these children have been deprived of normal mothering for one reason or another, and display the same emotional and social impairment and stereotyped movements as animals raised in isolation.